What's up, World Rapport family? We are back with another great edition of Building Rapport. I'm here live at the Waltos Performance Center here at Auburn Football. Joining me today is a very special guest. Haven't had him on in a while, sir. Nathan King, beat writer for 247 Sports. Nathan, let's talk Auburn football right now. We've been talking a lot about recruiting lately. Freeze has currently 8 of the top 10 recruits in the state committed. Now, you work with Christian over at 247. You know, what does this mean for the future of Auburn football that they're able to dominate the state like they have in recruiting?
For sure. I mean, I think the biggest piece that you're sort of looking at when you zoom out is the fact that you did so well in that first full recruiting class, right? You get a top 10 class. You're able to get in-state guys that we're already seeing make a difference, Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson, guys like that. Wondering how they were going to push things forward into 2025 and 2026. I believe it was an interview with Heather Dinich when Freeze first got hired. He said, look, if I'm not recruiting at a top 5, top 10 level in 3 years, I'm going to get fired. He understood what the most important parts of this job were. Now we're looking at the 2025 class is obviously off to a great start. You mentioned what they're doing in the state. 2026, I believe at the moment, still the number 1 class in the country. Obviously, that's a long way to go. But talking about what they're doing in state, a lot of people have pointed out that was kind of the Saban formula when he started at Alabama. Because if you can kind of lock down the guys in state, I think for the first few years of him at Alabama, that's what he did, locking down those guys. And then once you prove yourself on the field, once you prove your recruiting chops, you can sort of go national from there. Because, I mean, and not to relate everything to Nick Saban, but once he became the Nick Saban we all know at Alabama, he could get anybody he wanted, essentially, from all over the place. And it was Auburn and Georgia and the people in the close to the state of Alabama that were fighting him for those guys. I just think the plan that Hugh Freeze set in place, I think very early on, it was clear that they were going to prioritize the state. Also, people like Christian, who have been studying recruiting for a long time, and Jason, who've watched these kids, they sort of knew, hey, 2025 in the state is going to be crazy. The level of talent.
It's a really good class, right?
Right. It's approaching. I mean, it's not California, Texas, Georgia, but it's getting there. And this class in particular, I don't know how it stacks up against those kinds of states. But Hugh Freeze knew this 2025 class in the state was going to be super important. And I just think now so more than ever, when you look at the transfer portal, guys want to come home. I think people go far away, and something that's not the case all the time, but you go far away. You want to come back home. How much of a difference does that make when you get in-state guys who don't need to go back home in the transfer portal? Right. They're already close to home. I wonder if a couple years down the line, maybe we'll be talking about that as a difference maker for, roster attrition that's so difficult every offseason.
Sticking with the theme of recruiting, part of, I think, the genius of what Saban was able to do was not only was he landing in-state kids, but he made Alabama a national brand. So he could go across the country easily and get those kids. Is this part of the formula for Freeze to try to make Auburn a national brand now in the absence of Saban?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, you look at, like I just mentioned, what you set up in the state, I think is number 1. That's first and foremost. Even when you're looking at Georgia, Florida, and surrounding areas like that, just sort of setting up your footprint here in the Southeast, I think is the most important thing. You look at the people Hugh Freeze has put on his staff. It's been a big emphasis on the state. That staff is going to change, though. It is, I think, in a really good spot in terms of a recruiting staff right now. I think somebody like Charles Kelly, who's got so many recruiting chops in this area, I think it's very intentional by Freeze to take a look at that. A guy like Marcus Davis, who is, in terms of in-state recruiting,
he's doing really well.
Now, is as good as anybody. You look at, obviously the Freeze 4, a guy like Derek Smith in this class coming up, other guys that they're in on as well. And so I think it's a good starting point for them to focus on the state. Then a few years down the line, you're saying, hey, what does that staff look like? Who knows what year 4 and 5 under Freeze look like? Then you can start to sort of expand your horizons. But in my opinion, when you're looking at building an SEC program, when you got to go against Georgia and Alabama in recruiting every year, if you don't own the state, if you don't try to own the state, it's going to be really difficult to recruit elsewhere, I think.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Even in previous years with previous coaches, we've seen an emphasis on the Alabama, Georgia, Florida recruiting ground to try to build something special. Lots of speed and lots of talent in the state of Florida. I think fans will be looking forward to see if Freeze can expand that that recruiting footprint. Let's move on to the season. They got a lot of high-profile freshmen, not least of which is the Cam Coleman.
Yep.
He's been making plays in camp. You and I have been here watching him make those plays so far through camp. He's going to start from game 1. Yep. What does Freeze have to do in your mind with Cam Coleman to continue to go out and recruit high-level wide receivers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I'm interested to talk to today about somebody like Derek Nix. Essentially, they have 2, maybe 3 wide receiver coaches, if you think about it, on this roster. Remember, Maurice Harris was a guy that Freeze thought about trying to go get on his first assistant staff.
Yeah.
Now he's here as an off-field guy. You've got Marcus Davis. Derek Nix was there at Ole Miss when they produced all those high-level offenses, when they produced all those high-level receivers. Freeze talked about it in his first press conference of fall camp, though. It's impossible to ignore the physical and the athletic tools that you need.
Yeah.
Like you
catch radius is what he said.
You almost can't even go anywhere without those kinds of things. It's great to work hard. It's great to be a guy who's committed to doing everything he needs to do in practice. And Cam Coleman is absolutely that guy. But it starts with the fact that, we were out there yesterday and Michael Casagrande from AL.com, he's like, dude, this reminds me of going out to Alabama practices when they had all those 5-star freshmen.
Right.
And they just look different, and you can't teach that element of things. But I think the most important part is what we've heard all spring and all summer about a guy like Cam Coleman. First one in, last one out. That's a cliche, but he's shown that so far.
Mm-hmm.
Look, he's still 17 years old. He doesn't even turn 18 until next Wednesday. And so to have that work ethic, to have that kind of rapport that he was able to generate with somebody like Peyton Thorne in the summer, them putting in all that work, I think those aspects are maybe more important for why, like you said, he's going to start game 1. I completely agree. I wonder if those things are almost even more important, the coaches seeing him work that way, than his 5-star billing. But his 5-star billing obviously is what does all that work out there on the practice field.
Obviously, everyone knows who Cam Coleman is, but we got a chance to talk to Ken Lee, you and I did earlier this week, and he said that Perry Thompson and Malcolm Simmons were guys to watch who are also making plays in camp. What are the chances that we see a Perry Thompson break the starting lineup, you think, this season?
Yeah, starting lineup, I mean, we'll see. If you're talking starters in terms of like 3 main guys, I think it says a lot about Keandre Lambert-Smith. The first day of practice, he was out there with the ones. And I know lots of career yards, a power 4 guy. But as you know, like when you miss the spring, when you're a late enrollee, that's tough. I think that says a lot about him and his experience level, that he was out there with the ones right away. Look, for a guy like Perry, there are things that are almost even more impressive than a guy like him. You look at his quickness. I mean, we saw him out there returning punts the other day. And like, he's 6'3", 220. That's not a gimmick.
That's
thing.
crazy.
Like
that's freakish.
That is a legitimate option that they could have, because you look at what he did in high school, returning kickoff, doing everything for Foley. And so I think Perry may be a guy that you see more type of gadget stuff over the course of the season. Maybe a little bit less productive. I think still those main 3 guys, your Cam Coleman, your Robert Lewis, your Keandre Lambert-Smith, I think those are going to be the primary guys in terms of the stats this year. But look, when you get down to the red zone, having a guy like Perry and Cam, and you line up Rivaldo Fairweather there at tight end, it gives Thorne more options when you get closer to scoring territory.
Yeah, I spoke with Freeze one-on-one earlier upstairs in his office, and we talked about, hey, is Auburn going to get out of 12 personnel this year and get into more 11 and 10 personnel? He said, we'll probably see 11. Reports are they're going to stick to 12 maybe primarily. So for those of you listening, that's 2 tight ends, 2 wideouts, and a running back. So no slot receiver on the field. But Robert Lewis is another guy who's shown up on the Bolitnikoff watch list, right? He's a guy from Georgia State. His teammates have raved about him. Peyton Thorne has raved about him. How important is that slot position, you think, this year to making that passing game go?
Yeah, really important. I'm glad you brought that up, because those guys on the outside, I think we're going to see a lot of plays made. Keandre Lambert-Smith is sort of that flex guy, plays kind of that flanker role. Robert Lewis was somebody, Thorne at Media Day said, this is the leader of the room. This is the leader of this wide receiving core. Even going back to the spring when Marcus Davis had only been on campus for a few weeks, when Robert Lewis had only been on campus for a few weeks, Marcus Davis said, look, this is a guy I'm getting to help me with drills. This is somebody I'm getting to help me with these young guys, kind of bringing them along. You've talked to Rob Lewis. He is just kind of that quiet leadership presence.
Yeah, very calm leadership.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you look at his production at Georgia State, like this is a guy who's going to bring some production to that slot position. And again, how important to be here for the spring. But a guy that we haven't mentioned yet, I mean, behind him in the slot, I think is what it's going to look like. Sam Jackson, yeah. I mean, he was hampered by that shoulder injury in the spring, obviously making that transition from quarterback to receiver. Again, I think a lot of people sort of wondered, and Freeze said it. He said, this is maybe a little bit of a risk. Right. I don't think it's going to be a gimmicky thing. Like, I legitimately think he can go out there and play slot receiver just because he is one of the fastest players on the field. And so you're right, that slot position between those 2 guys, it's going to, I think, maybe go into the season flying a little bit under the radar. But as you know, you have to have those guys in critical downs and distance to be able to make plays for you. I think they have a couple guys this year that can. Yeah,
Peyton Thorne is going to be looking for more playmakers, I think, on the field. Now, he was one of the things we talked about with Freeze was Peyton Thorne was bottom of the league in pass attempts. As a matter of fact, Freeze said it was the lowest of any quarterback that he's ever coached his whole career. So they're looking to move that. It was like about 260, Nathan, and his quarterbacks average between 380 and 400 pass attempts. Now, the percentages held true, but the attempts came down. What do we need to see from Peyton Thorne, you think, this year for Auburn to maybe hit that over? Vegas said it at 7.5.
Sure. I mean, I think the confidence when you just put the ball in the air is the most basic thing. And that's what we've heard about all preseason. Again, really excited today as we sit here on Thursday morning, going to talk to the offensive assistant coaches later to kind of hear their side of things, because we've heard from his teammates all preseason. We even heard in the spring, I don't know if you remember, it was like 2 or 3 weeks in, he said there was just a little tweak in the offense and it made everything click. That's just an example of a guy who's been on campus a little longer, a guy who enrolled last May. He got on campus as fast as he could, but again, he wasn't there for the spring. I know he's an older guy. I know he's entering his sixth season, playing college football. But he's still technically a young quarterback. Like, guys like that are allowed to get better, and you're allowed to get better when you have way better receivers around you. I mean, Rivaldo Fairweather said it a couple of days ago. He said, look, we had guys last year who didn't know the plays. Like that's about as cut and dry as you can get. Again, not to harken so much on what happened last year, but I just think when you talk to anybody in this building, the ability for Peyton Thorne to step back, know where he's going with the football, and know that maybe a 50-50 ball is more like a 75-25 ball this season.
He said 80-20 when he was playing with Keon Coleman.
Yep, 80-20. I think, that even if it's not like that every single play, just that mindset, you can't really replace it. Greg McElroy said, and was talking about it at SEC Media Days, how you sort of can't replace that innate confidence as a quarterback. Right. Again, this is all great. It's all been a lot of praise. Still the preseason.
Yeah.
It's still out there in camp. I'm interested to see maybe what the scrimmage looks like on Saturday when they get more in game type situations. And then obviously they've got a couple games early in the year to maybe figure things out and iron things out.
Let's finish talking about expectations for the season. Yep. Auburn starts off with 5 straight home games. Very unusual. And then they don't play a home game for the entire month of October. Yeah. Which kind of sucks because, that's your best football weather there. Yep. After that stretch that is Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, they come out of that playing Vanderbilt, ULM, Texas A&M at home. And then you go on the road to Alabama and Tuscaloosa, where Auburn hasn't won in 14 years. Right. What does Freeze have to do? What do you see out of this schedule? And sitting down with Feinbaum at Media Days, we kind of agreed that Oklahoma game sits there, it's looming large, right? Like, what are the key wins and, what games can they afford to lose? Yeah, the swing games to me, Oklahoma at home, Kentucky on the road, because I think those are maybe the most closely contested right now. Again, it's so early. We're sitting here in early August, but if you were to look at the Vegas spreads, like they would say those games are pretty close. You and I were talking about before we got rolling, that Oklahoma game, I mean, that could decide whether you start 5-0. Again, this is not saying Cal can't give them a game. They absolutely can. Yeah, but you should beat Cal. Right. You should beat Cal. You should probably beat Cal by more than you did last year. You ripped the doors off of Arkansas last year on the road. You should win that game in week 4. Anything can happen in the SEC. And then you look at what Oklahoma has. They don't go on the road until week 5. I know they have a big Tennessee game. Both of these teams could be 4-0. Right. And I think both these teams can maybe be ranked in week 5. I'm not saying, Auburn would be able to parlay that momentum into anything, on the road, a big upset over Georgia or anything like that. But I think when you're talking about the difference between a 7-5 team, a difference, maybe a 9-3 team, that Oklahoma game, that Kentucky game, they're just such big swing games for me, because what if you sweep everything at home? It's other than Oklahoma. I know A&M, people are high on A&M, and I think Mike Elko's done a good job. Sure. You should beat that team at home. You're in year 2. You feel like you've made improvements there in year 1. Other than Oklahoma, I think there's a really good chance they can win 7 games at home. Obviously, there's a chance they could do that. If you sweep all your home games, then I hesitate to say it's just gravy on the road. What if you sweep everything at home? That's not the most outlandish take to me. And then you go grab one from Kentucky. Yeah. You're 9-3. And I don't think that is the most outlandish projection ever. At the same time, I could see those 2 games easily going the other way. All of a sudden you're 7-5 and it's, you've improved, but it's not feeling as, sort of confidence building. And so those are the 2 games that I sort of circle when I look at the schedule. 9-3 and recruiting would be out of control for 2026. Yeah, 2 thumbs up. You're feeling great about it. And to contrast that with what's happening across the state with the standard that Saban set, 9-3 would be a disappointment and a sign that maybe they're trending down. So it's a great time to be a head coach at Auburn, I think, following up a Nick Saban retirement. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, how they go there. But I want to thank you for joining me today, Nathan. Before we get out of here, look into the camera and tell people where they can find you. Yeah, for sure. AuburnUndercover.com. I decided to be a company man today, just like you. I mean, it's been, you've been here. It's been a fun camp. Like
Auburn's great. They give us a lot of access. It's fun to be out there for an hour and a half at practice. And we like to take advantage of that. We've got full practice notes, player interviews. We're trying to do what we're hearing every morning, where Jason, Christian, and I will just sort of pass along the whispers we're hearing from inside the building. Been really fun. Camp is always a grind, but it's a great time, and look forward to the season.
Guys, that's it for another great edition of Building Rapport with my guy Nathan King from 247 Sports. Please go follow him on Twitter at Nathan King. We'll be back with more content like this. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Report on every social media platform. TW Report on TikTok. We're signing off, and as always, War Eagle.